Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I'm Irish. I was reared Catholic, and I'm not religious anymore. But I find it very interesting, like people who are Catholic. Does that make sense? Like, I'm quite interested in Catholic theology and why people believe the way they do. I'm not trying to come in and dissuade people from the religion if it makes you feel comfortable. All the power to you. But I'd just be interested in why. Like, is anyone here who here? I'd be mostly interested in who here wasn't born Catholic but converted to Catholicism, if any of you.
I think both me and Bezo are cradle Catholic, I think, right?
Yeah, I'm cradle Catholic. Yeah, my story's pretty
I don't know
boring.
about B.
Sounds like Supreme story is also boring.
No, I apostated and became a Seventh-day Adventist and went back to the church.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not a Catholic, but I've been raised as a Lutheran. But I did actually look into the Catholics. But um, if you're actually looking for somebody who's been like transitioning, is it for like something so like you understand like their how they transition, so like you can be like transitions
Yeah,
to.
because for me, like I was born into it, and in Ireland, it kind of permeates the whole culture, at least in the south where I'm from. But it's completely died a death among like I'm 26. It's completely died a death among young people in Ireland. Like
So, so,
you struggle to find anyone nowadays. I think that is actually practicing Catholic, at least in their 20s or 30s.
so you would find it more interesting to find maybe someone who wasn't to hear from someone's perspective who wasn't a Catholic who
Yeah,
is
someone who
raising them.
converted. Because I find like all the online stuff from America about trad cats very interesting. Like, because that's not a thing in Ireland. Like, no one is converted. Like, I'm sure there are some young people who are Catholic, but like,
So
you'd be
let
very
me.
hard pressed to find them. Like,
I'm gonna
Ireland
link
had.
a video for you. Okay, it's from this guy named Sam Shimon. Um, the title doesn't do the justice of but it kind of addresses. So I don't know if you've heard of this guy before, Sam Shimon.
No, I've watched a few. I've watched a few of the bloody Catholic YouTubers, like your man Council Trent, and then
Yeah,
I've
yeah, yeah.
seen some of the fucking
This
other
Sam
ones. Like, I've
Shimon
seen a fella.
guy, he's a really good, like, smart, has good memory, Christian apologetic. Um, he was a Baptist, and now he's been moving in the direction of Catholicism. So I don't know. You might want to check this video out.
Oh, I should say I'm agnostic. I'm not
Okay.
Christian. That would I understand. I've watched a lot of debates between like Proddies and Catholics and stuff. Obviously, people from the north are usually Presbyterian, like Protestants up in Northern Ireland. Some Anglicans, it's usually a class thing. So like Anglicans are, I guess, for Americans, Episcopalians, Church of England or Church. Well, you know what I mean,
Yeah,
like the established church in England.
Episcopalians. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, so
exactly. But
that sounds more like a
class thing in
cultural
Ireland,
stuff than.
like yeah, like a lower class Protestant or working class Protestant is way more likely to be Presbyterian, whereas like the Anglo Irish aristocracy that controlled Ireland during British rule, they were all Anglican, like Episcopalian, the established church. And the church was established in America, like after the Revolution or whatever. I mean, I'll be completely forthright with. Just find it very hard to fathom people. Again, this is no disrespect, but like I find it hard for people to hold on to the Catholic faith. Like it seems so historically contingent on like a lot of things happening, like each of the successive councils. The idea that you know like the whole filioque debate between using the Orthodox or like you know the Church of Peter. I'm not saying I'm coming from a Protestant perspective, but like it is hard to find in like the first century like an established ecclesiastical church structure, like the way that the Catholic. Obviously, if you're Catholic, you believe that like ecclesiastical structures existed since like the start. Like Peter is the rock upon which the church is built. It says that in the Bible. Like, but you don't really see like a lot of historical evidence for that. And also, like there was like lots of different Christian sects in the first, second, third centuries. You got all these different. You had the Arian heresy and Nestorians, and Nestorians still exist in Iraq. And it just seems for me like there's a lot of historically contingent things that happened that just happened to. Now, of course, you'll probably say, oh, it's divine intervention or whatever. But like, how would you say to someone who?
You cut out.
Sorry, yeah, could I? I'm just saying it seems a very like everything that kind of happened could easily just be explained by the patterns of history, in my opinion, rather than like the inherent logic of Catholicism. As for why Catholicism became the biggest denomination, or like I don't know if any of you have met Brazilians. There's a fair few Brazilians in Ireland. A lot of like Brazil was like a whatever 100% Catholic country until very recently, and now evangelicals. Sorry, that's actually basically a second completely unrelated topic to be honest. But I just mean there's a lot of in
Yeah,
the global
yeah,
south.
we're covering a lot of topics right now, but keep going.
Yeah, but how would you manage to get these kind of people back into the faith? Like you have all these people, especially in like the favelas in Brazil, that are like going in en masse to evangelicalism, which, to be crystal clear, obviously I much prefer Catholicism to evangelicalism. I think the average Catholic is a much more tolerant person, for lack of a better word.
All right. So, well, first of all, um, ultimately, right? So we're like ultimately, I don't think there's anything that a Catholic could say or do to convert someone. That's something that motion or that motive has to come from the person themselves. Okay. But secondly, do I believe there are things that Catholics can do to help facilitate the right conveyance and understanding of Catholic teaching and Catholic belief? Yes, I do. I believe that Christians are obligated to do that, to facilitate it. That's what being a church is all about. Thirdly, to address an earlier point that you were trying to allude to, is that for me, I actually find that the fact that many things about the Catholic Church are historically contingent is precisely what makes Catholicism more historically reliable to me. That is, right, that because that is the way things happen historically, therefore it is more reliably true. That the
But
claims
would
it's
you say
making are more reliably
that
true.
would you what would if I were to say to you that the papacy as we modern understand it happened during the Gregorian Revolution? Would you agree or disagree?
Um, if you're looking for like a point in history where we could say, oh, here is the clear point at which the Catholic Church innovated papal supremacy, I don't know if I could agree with that. Because the teaching of papal supremacy is a teaching that I would consider developed over time without having to be definitively declared.
But
So
again,
I
correct me if I'm wrong. From what
mhm.
I understand, the idea is that the papacy has always been supreme. Like it wasn't historically developed as such. Like Saint Peter was the Bishop of Rome, which was the head of the church. Like the Pieros, the stone upon which the church was built.
Mhm.
So I just think, like, again, I'm not Christian and I'm not a Protestant by any means. Like, but if I were to go back to Christianity, I think Orthodoxy would have a stronger argument in some ways than Catholicism for like historical continuance, if that makes sense. Like, why aren't you Orthodox? Not trying to say that in a ha gotcha kind of way. I actually just what
Well, I mean, can I ask
if
you
you're born
first?
Catholic, then
Can I ask you first because you keep like covering quite a wide view of topics, and then I can address why I believe I'm a Catholic instead of Greek Orthodox. But um, what is it that because you keep alluding back to like the historically contingent things about like Catholic belief? What about the history of the Catholic Church do you find incongruous?
well, I think it was created in the fourth century. I'll be completely blunt with you. Like, I don't think if you look at the first, second, third century of the church, like there's no orthodoxy. Orthodoxy was created as an institutional factor. Like I think if you had just left the Christian churches to duke it out, you would have had like a much wider plethora of like beliefs, and it was because the Roman Church or the Roman state in the fourth century like consolidated into like at least allowed it to be consolidated into a general dogma. So like that's why we don't have Gnostics anymore. We don't have obviously Arianism took a longer time to wipe out, but like a lot of the Germanic tribes were Aryan in the fourth and fifth century. Like I just think again because I'm agnostic, I don't really subscribe to any of the Abrahamic beliefs, so I don't understand why God would have allowed that level of like discongruous belief systems for centuries, and then ultimately it was like, okay, now is the time where we systematize it. Like, how is that fair to people who were born in the second, third, fourth, fifth century, or like if you were born in a Germanic tribe in the fifth century or sixth century, and all you were exposed to was Arianism because you happened to be born in like a Visigothic tribe or something in the sixth century? It does. I know it's probably like a rehashing of the problem of evil in some ways, but for me that doesn't. I don't get it. Like I can't really say it any clearer way than just simply saying I don't understand why God's providence would work that way. Does that make sense?
Not really, because you're kind of, I guess, trying to synthesize like wide, large categories of knowledge together into like what you consider your worldview to be, which is it's seems incongruous to you, um, because that's how you experience it. Um, so let's just say what I first heard you say that you found incongruous. The first thing that you mentioned was you believe that orthodoxy, which you would identify with the church, didn't happen, quote unquote, historically until the fourth century.
Yeah.
Am I correct to assume that what you believe to be the quote unquote church or the institution of the church to be what is orthodox in teaching?
Well, what I mean by that is, you have the various councils in the fourth and fifth century, like establishing Chalcedonian Christianity. Let's forget about the Great Schism, right? You have a main ecclesiastical church by whatever the fifth, sixth century, and then before that, yeah, you don't have a single institution of church. Like I know Saint Ignatius was trying to do it, and like whenever he was writing second century, third century, but you didn't have it until after Constantine. You just didn't. Like there was no systematized church that had like a universal orthodoxy until a couple centuries after Christ's death. I don't think anyone would dispute that, to be honest.
So, well, if you believe that orthodoxy, so I guess I mean, are you would agree that the development of doctrine is kind of presupposed, right, in even your identification that the church was instituted in the fourth century?
Sorry, what do you mean? I think I understand your question, but I just want to make sure I am.
Yeah, so how are you justifying that there wasn't a church before the fourth century and then all of a sudden there is a church after the fourth century?
No, no, no. I'm not saying that there wasn't a church. There was churches. There was no universal church as such until the fourth century. Like there was, decentralized little bodies around the Mediterranean. There was various competing beliefs. Like Saint Origen expresses beliefs on the Trinity that aren't orthodox now, for example, right?
Right, he was
Like,
anathematized on 15 propositions.
yeah, like so. But Saint Origen is still considered a saint. I'm
He's
not.
not a
That's
saint.
Origin
Yeah, he's
is not
not
a
a saint.
saint.
He's not a saint.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, well then
Can
I'm fucking.
you? I'm curious. Do you know any church that recognizes them as a saint?
Let me look that up. Yeah, I thought. Okay, then
All
I'm
right.
wrong on that one.
I
But I
feel
just
like
mean like,
interrupting.
pardon?
I said no. I'm
Then I'm
just saying. Sorry for interrupting. But yeah, go.
no. Feel free to interrupt. All I'm trying to say is, you had various churches until the fourth century. I don't think there was like no church. There's obviously some, ideas of ecclesiastical people in, or, like, there's definitely evidence of like bishops or people with like bishop positions by that time. I just mean that like you only had a systematized, organized church, like an institutional framework that only really happened after.
Could
So,
And
we
I, like
could we
does
call
s-
Peter a
hold on,
bishop?
hold on, Supreme. So again, I'm gonna address it again because just to reframe Willie time, um, the point of contention that I'm trying to identify, right? So is from your earlier statements when you're saying, right, that for you, you find the contingency, right, of the church to history, um, that for you, right, is the point, is what is incongruous, right, to your understanding of church, right? Whereas
Yeah,
for me, my claim, and this is the point in contention, right, is that for me, the fact that there are many things in the church that are historically contingent, for me, in the way that I believe or interpret what happened in history, makes it more historically reliable. That what the church says that it is what it is. So this is our point of contention, right?
yeah. Okay, that's a
So
fair
right,
point of
right, right.
contention,
So
right?
so that's why
But
that's why I'm trying to now we're going into the weeds and
yeah,
we want to start clarifying, right? To be
E-
precise by what you mean by church and also what you mean by orthodoxy, right? And if what is a church for you is what is identical with orthodoxy. Because I understand you can point to, right, like the historical reality of the church, especially in the early church, right? And this is what you're finding incongruous, right? Is that for you when you say stuff like the institutionalized universal church didn't exist until the fourth century because you don't have orthodox doctrine until then, right? Or you don't have orthodoxy until then. Is that your claim?
yeah. I mean, obviously, there's church fathers that you now point to and say they were the Orthodox ones, but obviously, until the fourth century, there wasn't a council that came along and said these are the Orthodox teachers. You had plenty of other who we now find heretical,
So then
like
do you believe that Christians prior to the 4th century didn't hold orthodox beliefs?
some did, but they certainly didn't. Like didn't
There was
have the
just there was
same.
just no there was just no
There was no
uniformity to it.
universality. There was no universality. If you went, if you were in Corinth, you might have certain church fathers that you guys would find,
Okay.
compelling. And then if you're
So
in other parts of the Christian world, like, sorry,
so
I'm going off the
so
side point here. But I think
Willie, we're gonna leave the question about orthodoxy aside because um you still haven't justified what you mean by orthodoxy. So we're just gonna leave it aside. I'm not shifting the goalposts, let's say, but we'll leave it aside because we're gonna come back to orthodoxy, um, and your justification for what orthodoxy is, and we're gonna turn to something that's inherently related to this topic of orthodoxy. Um,
go ahead.
are you aware of what orthopraxy is?
No,
Okay,
I'm going to assume that it's. Well, let me guess because I don't speak Greek, but I assume it means something to do with the Orthodox practices
correct.
of the church. Okay.
Okay, so do you believe that the facts conform to our beliefs, or do you believe that the belief itself is what conforms to the facts?
Wait, hold on. Okay, let me just make sure I understand what you're saying. Do I believe that facts conform to beliefs? Wait, hold on. Rephrase that. I don't want to misunderstand you.
Do you believe, or I'm using the word believe, do you hold that beliefs conform to the facts, or that facts conform to beliefs?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on what you're talking about. Like, faith obviously wouldn't really conform to facts as such. You
Why?
don't have,
Why?
because you didn't see Jesus walking out of a tomb with of Arimathea. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't actually watch that happen. But that doesn't mean you're not a Christian. It doesn't mean you have sincere beliefs about that.
So then how is one a Christian if they didn't
Believe
witness it?
by believing in Jesus Christ as the Son of God.
But if one didn't witness Jesus Christ or hear it from his own lips, then how is it that the Christian could have that belief? How was it that he came to that belief?
Because they have belief. I think Paul didn't ever meet Jesus, but he still believed that Jesus was the Son of God.
Okay, so would you think that it's fair to say that it's because there is the testimony of witnesses or disciples?
Sure, some people, yeah, like yeah, but also, there's a testimony of disciples around Muhammad. There's testimony of disciples around the Buddha. Like, yes, of course, that
So
is
the
what people
belief,
who are
so
religious
so
claim. Of course,
so 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 it's not the facts of the resurrection or the facts around Jesus that the faith, that okay. So it's not
yeah, no,
necessarily right that I forgot how you worded it exactly, but you said that well, it depends on the circumstances. In the case of the faith in Jesus, like we weren't there to see it, yet people call themselves Christian. But upon
yeah,
further investigation, when we look at, well, how could Christians, right? Because it begs the question, then how could Christians that come after the time of like the first disciples who were eye hand witnesses, how it is that they could come to hold beliefs of the same kind, right?
sure, yeah,
And wouldn't it rely on the facts? Right? So it in fact for Christians that come after the first hand disciples, right, and weren't first hand witnesses, they would have to base their belief on the facts, right? So it would be the belief that they
okay,
hold is
but
actually conforming to the
I
facts.
think,
So the
okay,
question would
okay,
be whether or
wait,
not, hold
there's,
on, the
there's
question,
truth to
right,
what
right.
you're
The question
saying.
would be rather whether or not the facts, right, as they are reported or attested to are reliable, wouldn't you say?
To an extent, but of course, if that was the case, then no false religion would ever spread. Like, there's plenty of people who sincerely believe in the statements of other people who claim to have met other prophets. Like, look at, I don't know, just take an example, Manichaeanism. Saint Augustine was a Manichaean for several years. Like, that's he writes about this. He was convinced because of Manichaean preachers. Obviously, didn't meet Mani because Mani lived in Iran, and that religion then ultimately died out after a few
Willie,
centuries.
you're cutting in and out.
But
Can
that doesn't
you,
mean that the people were sincere in their beliefs.
Willie, you're cutting in and out.
Oh, sorry, I'm using push talk. What I'm saying is every religion would claim such a, like, that kind of logic, because by definition, if you're going around preaching
What,
religion,
wait,
you obviously believe the fact
okay.
of religion. That's not unique to
No, no, no,
Christianity.
no,
That's
no,
what I'm
no,
trying
no.
to say. Like, I know,
What kind of logic?
like, you're saying that beliefs conform to facts to an extent.
Right.
Like, you're saying that, oh, people were
Because
convinced
beliefs
not
that
because they
people,
saw
right,
Jesus, but
my
they knew.
right, from my perspective, I believe that our, it's the belief that conforms to the facts that we have. That's my
Of course, but
worldview,
every religion.
right?
That's why I'm saying, like,
But that's not
if you were a
everybody's
seventh century
that's
Muslim,
not everybody's worldview though. Some people do in fact hold the beliefs that they try to conform the facts to. You know what I mean?
but
So
okay,
there
take for
are people
instance,
that
right, a
there are
Muslim.
people, right, that fundamentally hold beliefs, right, that they don't that they justify, you know, without an appeal to those facts, so to speak. They just hold them to be
Okay,
true regardless of the facts, right?
sure. And I think you're going. Are you going down the line of apostolic succession? Is that where you're going with this? I just
No, well, I mean, I guess what we're trying to establish, or what I was trying to, I guess, like, um, investigate with you is at least within the Christian tradition, right? What can we say about it, right? In terms of how they developed orthodoxy or orthopraxy, did they conform their belief to the facts or to the history that was there? Or did they conform their beliefs out of the facts that they either testified to or that they relied on the reliability for of those people that said that those were the facts? Does that make sense? So to me, that's
that makes
where
sense. Yeah.
it would be more intellectually honest, right? To go to what we can gather about the facts, and if the things that the Christians were either saying or practicing are consistent with one way of looking at the world in relation to fact and belief, then the other way of looking at the relation between fact and belief.
Okay.
Because if they were just believing things and conforming and making the facts fit that belief, then we could just say that, well, they just fabricated the whole thing. So in which case it wouldn't matter what they say was true doctrine or not, right? So
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
working, yeah, yeah. So I'm taking it for granted when you identify institutional church with orthodoxy to mean that for you, you would at least admit to some sort of historical reliability that the Christians, even the earliest witnesses, were conforming their beliefs based on the facts.
Yeah. Okay. I'll tolerate that. Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, so then if we were to do that, then we would have to investigate what the first Christians were doing, wouldn't you say? Or the earliest Christians
Yeah.
were
Sounds
doing.
fair enough. Yep.
So then if we can establish that the earliest Christians did in fact hold orthodox, quote unquote, beliefs prior to it being declared at some future point in time, then we can say that even those institutionalized forms or declarations of Orthodox belief that were declared later was still part of the church at the earliest time, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Sounds fair enough.
Yeah, so again, if you're identifying orthodoxy with institutionalization, then for all intents and purposes, the institution of the church did exist even much earlier than the first century,
Sorry about that. Continue. So,
right? Wouldn't that be the logical inference based on
I
the
mean,
facts
I
that
to
we
an
mean,
extent,
I,
have?
but yes, but again, what I'm trying to say is that just because, even if we could say that every single belief conforms to the facts of what occurred, you know, going back 4 odd centuries, obviously you wouldn't dispute that there's been some form of change over 4 centuries. Like no one would, of course, the early church and the Catholic Church
There
are
was
quite different,
definitely
and even
development of that doctrine relative to the challenges to the orthodox teaching itself, right? So there may have been people like Arians, Nestorians, Monophysites, um, Neophysites, who started teaching what the church fathers or fathers of the ecumenical councils found were not orthodox teaching, as in they weren't the same teachings that were always held by the early Christians. But that wouldn't be a change in doctrine. It would be either a defense of the doctrine or or clarification of the doctrine um,
okay,
that's
I think
developed
that's where
because
we disagree.
of unorthodox teaching, right?
Okay, I think that might be
So
where
right,
we
right, right.
depart. Like,
The delineation between orthodoxy is going to be presupposing that there were in fact unorthodox ways of doing things that was trying to change, right? It doesn't mean that to be orthodox is to change prior held doctrine.
yeah, yeah, okay, fair enough.
Okay.
But I think where we're disagreeing here is the idea that there was this, again, delineate or not delineated, but but consistent belief system for 4 centuries that reached the 300s, and then were you know these facts that have been carried on building the belief consistently and without inerrant, then reached the Council of Nicaea and were clarified, and it was these reactive elements, be it the Arians or the Gnostics or these groups, that then they're the ones who went against orthodoxy. Like I think all we need to do is look at something like the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Yeah, but
because
then
you
you're
can clearly
just
see the,
but then you're just gish galloping around, right? And you're not so what you're willing to do is you're willing to suspend your disbelief that what the Roman Catholic Church has been saying, that yeah, these are the orthodox belief, you're suspending your disbelief about that, and you're only choosing selectively to believe or to consider controvertible cases, right? Or things that might be
well, no, what
incongruous
I was
but
entertaining.
haven't yet been proven to be congruous, right? So
Well, okay, I think we're
wouldn't that be another case where you're suspending your disbelief about what the church believes, which they are saying that there is historical reliability in how the facts of the early church do confirm to what they believe, and you're willing to suspend that for another belief that you hold that you're trying to conform uh, the facts of history to, right? And this belief that you're suspending the belief in the church for is this belief that it is incongruous. So that's why for
Okay,
me,
well,
I
how
can
about we revert it to
my
another?
statement could be, you know what?
I understand
For
what you're
me,
saying. I understand, and
the
I was
contingency that right, the historical contingency for me actually makes it more historically reliable,
okay. Okay,
whereas you don't
I'll
believe that
say
that's the
two
case.
things. One is they're not necessarily related, but you'll see where I'm coming from a second. Okay, so I understand what you're saying. I'm not disputing like the logic of what you're saying. But I guess what I would disagree with is this idea. If you're, I'm not even disagreeing with your idea that facts will build upon belief. Okay, what I'm saying is I don't necessarily know if there was a set sense of belief based on let's say there was a standard. I'm not disputing that Jesus existed. Okay, that's it seems pretty historically accurate to say that Jesus did exist, and there's no real mainstream religious scholars or biblical scholars who would say that Jesus was like a myth. I think Jesus was a real person. Okay, but even within the first century, you have Jewish Christians. You have different Christian sects that have already formed by the time you know
But what is
before
right,
even
right? So
possibly
right,
even
right,
before
right.
the
So
Gospel
to
of John
avoid begging the
was written.
question, hold on, Willie, you're cutting in and out again.
Okay, sorry, go on.
But so
Well, okay, yeah.
because I want to take you seriously, right? If
What I'm
we
saying is, I don't think there was that standard belief. There
Willie,
was
you're
that
cutting
standard
in and
belief
out.
that you're claiming in the first century.
No,
I
no,
don't
can
see
you
it.
repeat that one more time? Because
Sorry.
you're cutting
Okay.
in and out. It's
I don't.
roboting.
I don't. You're okay. Sorry. What I'm saying is, I do not think, and I can't see. I know you're saying, oh, you're this is your belief of your own, but what I'm saying is, I do not see any evidence for that belief in the first century, like standard belief that then there was deviation or reaction to. What I can do from the early days of the church, there was already Judaizers and Christianizers. Even St. Paul writes about this, and one of our oldest of the earliest days of the church. No one disputes that, but you have evidence that there's variance within the first century,
So you need to fix your internet.
which I'm just on 4G. Okay, well,
Like it just constantly cuts in and out. By the way, I'm recording the whole conversation, so
okay, yeah, that's fine. The no, yeah, what I was saying is I don't see how within the early first century. I hope it doesn't cut out. Even within the early first century, there wasn't a standard belief set. Even if the facts, let's say, were standard, or there's one set of facts. I'm not disputing that. Let's say Jesus did die and was a real person. Completely fine. I think Jesus was a real person. What I mean is, even within the first century, even within the writings of St. Paul, you already have evidence that there was multiple different belief systems going on. Paul writes about the Judaizers within the church. You know, so for me, I don't think that there was this standard set fate that was based on the facts of the matter, one set of fate, and then over time reactions and heresies and all this sort of stuff sprung out of that standard belief. I think from the very earliest days of Christianity, there already was disputes as to what the actual constitution of the religion was. Does that make sense?
no, it doesn't.
Okay. So do you think that there was
Without evidence, I can't I can't make sense of
okay,
your
what
claims.
about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Okay. Some of the Dead Sea Scrolls,
So
some of
hold
the
on,
writings
hold on.
date.
Can I respond?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, before you start gish galloping again. All right. So can I clarify, or have you clarify what it is that you believe that the so uh what do you believe that the Christians held as their belief within that first century or early Christianity?
Well, it seems a lot of them believed in
Or if you
circumcision.
or
Okay,
hold
a
on,
lot of them believed.
or if you don't believe that Christians had a unified belief at all, then what are your historical evidences that,
Okay, well, the historical
would
evidence
justify
is
that?
that there's we found evidence in of Judaized Christian movements that practice circumcision from the first century, and these were happening. The writings of Saint Paul, by all academic, like independent measurements, are older than the writings of the Gospel of John. Okay, and even within the writings of Saint Paul, he clearly writes that there are Judaizers and different Christian sects that are practicing male circumcision on babies, and that other sects that believe that Christianity is only open for Jews, whereas of
Mm-hmm.
course Saint Paul believed that it was open to Gentiles. So that would clearly, even within the Bible, there's evidence that there was different Christian sects at that time. Because clearly, if they believed it was open to all Gentiles, he wouldn't need to write that.
Wait, okay,
So
wait.
hold on, Miss B. Stop.
Ah,
So okay, so that's not so again. You're kind of gish galloping around and you're not actually engaging with the question that I asked, which was first, are you like, could you say like, I mean, could you say that Christians did hold to, like, even if it's one belief, right, that would identify one as a Christian? Are you saying that there was no unified belief that would identify themselves as a Christian because there's
Okay,
evidence?
that's a bit of you're shifting the goalposts a little bit here. What I'm saying
No, I'm
is,
not
and I have
shifting at
said
all.
that there was okay. What I've said is that
You're the one
I
that's
don't see
shifting
the
the
evidence.
goalposts
No,
because
okay,
you're
stop,
appealing to
stop.
you're
Let me
appealing to
talk.
evidence at this
Let
point,
me
right?
talk. Let me talk.
Go ahead.
What I was saying is, if there was an Orthodox standardized Christianity belief in the first century, I don't see any evidence for it. And what I was literally saying to you is that there is clear evidence from the writings of Paul that there was different sects within Christianity because there was Judaizers. Then you said, oh, well, is there not one set belief that Christians did have, which of course is the belief that Jesus was the Son of God? Okay,
Perfect. Now
I
you
don't even
got
know if
it.
that was
Okay, okay, great, great, great. So you are admitting that there was, right, a
okay. But
belief
hold
that
on,
the
wait.
Christians held, right?
I'm
Which would
actually
be
not
that
believing that.
Jesus
'Cause
wasn't just a just he just wasn't just some random Jew, but that he was a Jew that claimed to be the Son of God, right?
okay, well, this is the debate among the Christian scholars. Like, what's his name? What's that American guy's name? Like Bart Ehrman.
Yeah,
Bart
Bart
Ehrman would claim
Ehrman,
that the
right?
gospel
Yeah.
doesn't claim. Now, again,
Okay, okay.
I don't
So
know
so
as much as him.
what
I'm not
what
saying I
okay,
believe
okay. So
everything he says.
what is Bart Ehrman saying in his internal critique? What is he saying?
He's saying that Jesus claimed to be the Son of Man, and he was a messianic
What?
figure, but he didn't necessarily. In the bar, he there's no God like that. Bar Ehrman claims that in the Gospel of Mark, there's no actual claims that Jesus is,
And if
the
Mark was
the triune God.
if Mark was written earlier, right, than
Also,
all
that
the
it's
other
apocalyptic.
gospels, then he believes that Mark's account is more historically reliable than whatever Matthew, Luke, and John have to say, right? Is that what your claim is?
At least the synoptic gospels are, yeah. Again, I'm not Bart Ehrman. I don't necessarily take Bart Ehrman's word
Yeah.
as 100% true, but that's his claim. His claim would be that Mark is the oldest gospel that we know of,
Mm-hmm.
or Q is older, but we don't have Q. And in Mark, it doesn't necessarily claim. It makes no claim of the Trinity, and it doesn't even necessarily claim that Jesus is the Son of God. And also, it's apocalyptic.
Okay, so
It's
does
the
Bart
language in
Ehrman
Mark.
hold on. So does Bart Ehrman also believe that the writings of Paul can be sourced earlier than the Gospel of Mark?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I would assume that St. Paul is from like 60s AD. Seems to be the consensus that Mark is from around the same time. So around the
Correct.
same time.
And so and the thing is Bart Ehrman does believe that. So he does agree with the scholarly consensus that St. Paul, as far as we can source it, does come earlier than the earliest manuscripts or writings of Mark.
Okay, fair
So
enough.
that's
No dispute.
historical. So right, that's one set of historically reliable. But in Bart Ehrman's analysis of Pauline theology versus what he believes the synoptic gospels are saying was Jesus's theology, he claims that there are points of contention or incongruity between what Jesus said about himself and what Paul said that Jesus was, or Paul's belief about Jesus. So the thing is but the question still remains, right? It's going to be about what's historically reliable to claim that the Christians claim for themselves, right? And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because clearly, if we know that Paul's writing came before Mark, right? And Paul is literally writing, right? Uh, the word charisma, or what we understand is like charisma, right? This is the Christian proclamation that Jesus died, rose again, um, and is the Son of God, right? That this is found in Paul, right? Which again dates earlier than Mark. But for Bart Ehrman, his question is what he's saying is that look, if Mark doesn't mention this, right, that Jesus anywhere claims to be the Son of God, right? Mark is unable to corroborate Paul. But this seems kind of like a moot point in the first place if Mark comes after Paul anyways. You get what I mean? You
I
would
do get what you mean, but
hold, hold on,
I
hold on,
think
hold on,
it
hold on,
points
hold on,
more.
hold on.
Yeah, I
You
get.
would necessarily have to rely on what the other synoptic gospels say. And yes, in the other synoptic gospels, it can be demonstrated that Jesus does in fact refer to himself as the Son of God, right? So do you see how Bart Ehrman's position, right, doesn't really make it any less historically reliable that what St. Paul was saying was what the Christians believed? Do you see
Well,
that
it does. What
logically?
I'm trying to say, which
Yeah. So again,
if I
again,
take
I
your
mean, your appeal,
presuppositions
right?
as
But your appeal to Bart Ehrman, right? And I'm not saying that you're maliciously gish galloping, but what I'm saying is that I understand why you're going to bring Bart Ehrman up, and Bart Ehrman's been refuted multiple times on this point exactly, right? Is that regardless of his claim, it still doesn't matter, right? It still doesn't address the historical reliability of St. Paul's claims, right? He can only provide an internal critique after that between the theology of Jesus as we see in Mark and the theology that we see in Paul. But the only symmetry breaker is gonna that there's gonna be is what the other synoptic gospels have to say, right? And clearly, all of the Gospels themselves, whether it's Mark or not, all come after Paul in the first place. So even if so this is another form of what's called argument from silence, right? That's the kind of logical fallacy that Bart Ehrman is engaged in.
okay, okay. I'm going to just agree with
It still
everything you
doesn't
just said.
address
Okay.
whether or not Paul's
Okay.
charisma,
I'm not
right,
even
or Paul's letters is more historically reliable or not.
okay. Let's just actually say Paul is first, and
No,
all
I
of
mean,
Paul's
that is the
historical.
scholarly
I'm gonna,
consensus, and Bart
yeah,
Ehrman doesn't.
yeah, exactly.
He
I'm
actually
going to.
accepts this.
I don't. What I'm asking is, if Paul's letters clearly show that there was disputes in theology in the first century in the church, and no one would dispute that. Like no one disputes that there clearly was a Jewish Christian aspect. And I don't know which one came first. Did Pauline Christianity come first, where
Right,
it's
but the
open to
question
Gentiles?
would be is was it what kind of a disagreement was it? Was it a disagreement over belief or was it disagreement over practice? And that's why a lot earlier in the
Oh,
conversation, I said, hey, listen, I'm not trying to shift the goalpost, but what I'm doing here is we're going to put the orthodoxy question to a side for a little bit, and then we're going to address orthopraxy, right? Do you understand the difference between orthodoxy and
yes,
orthopraxy? And
yes.
you said, okay, well, I mean, based on my understanding, nominal understanding of Greek, yeah, I'm assuming that orthopraxy means orthopractice, right? Okay. So yeah,
Yeah,
I mean there can be distinctions between orthopraxy and orthodoxy, right? And that's constantly always been an issue, right? But I wouldn't
yes.
right, but you wouldn't
Okay,
be able to just synthesize them all as the same thing.
but my question would be if the evidence was that there was a Christian sect in the first century that only allowed Jews into the Christian church, only proselytized to other Jews and didn't allow Gentiles, and clearly Paul is combating this, then that means there was obviously some church that Pauline Christianity claims, and again, obviously other sects of Christianity besides Catholicism claim Paul too, or claim that they're in congruence with Paul. But what I mean is that there clearly wasn't a set standardized church, because otherwise Paul wouldn't have to even write the letters in the first place to claim that we shouldn't have these Jewish practices. And there is a lot of scholars who have studied the first century Jewish Christian cults. I don't know what they're like, the how they would, what the names of those churches are, but there is evidence that there was a lot of Jewish Christian cults that only allowed Jews in the first century and that weren't preaching to the outside. They died off. They died off in a few centuries.
Who died off?
I don't think that's obviously a difference. That's a difference in belief. Like if you're claiming that Christ only came for Jews,
No, no,
then
no.
that is
Well, right. So then, I mean, right. So the question is going to be, and what has, I mean, in a court, that's the thing is you still haven't provided the right evidentiary claim that you could make that judgment one from another without the internal critique. So we would have to go to the scriptures themselves again. So let's do this, okay? All right. Do you have a Bible next to you? Because now, like, we literally have to go to the internal critique. Because I do kind of
okay.
get what you're saying.
Hold on. All right,
No,
we
no,
can
no,
go to
no,
the
no, no,
Bible.
no. Let's go to the
We can go
scripture
to the
because
Bible if you
we're
want.
not going to gish gallop around and move on to something else. We're going to stick with this point, right? Which is what you're saying, right? Is if there could be evidence, if there, what you're asking is a hypothetical claim, right? Is that if there could be evidence, right, that the Jews, the earliest Christians, the Jewish Christians were in fact, right, a Judaizing Christianity, that wouldn't be the same thing that later Christians were saying that that what Jew was saying was also for the Gentiles. That's basically the claim that you're making that is yet to be substantiated. And what I'm saying is that in order to verify, right, this hypothetical is begging the question about what the internal critique is or how we interpret the internal
Why would
critique.
I assume that the Bible, which was compiled in the fourth century, would
Because
like?
you're appealing to the incongruity or apparent incongruity that Bart Ehrman finds between Mark and Paul, which we already established that if we're talking about historical reliability, then Paul, whatever Paul says, is more
I've already
historically reliable,
okay.
right? But then you're saying, well, even in the writer of Paul, there seems to be like Judaizing Christians, right? So then if we're gonna try to establish whether or not that case is more historically reliable because you're only making a hypothetical claim, then we have to go to the internal critique itself, which is the literal gospels. And if we go to the literal gospels, right, Mark, Luke, and Matthew all have the commissioning of the 12. In Matthew and Luke, it is explicitly attested to or written in Matthew and Luke that Jesus tells and commissions the disciples to go out to not just Jews but also to the Gentiles, right? And in one case he says, "Don't go out to the Gentiles, also go to go out to the 12 lost
yeah, of course, yeah,
nations of
that's true.
Israel,"
And
right?
I don't
First,
that yeah,
you see what I mean?
that's Pentecost.
And
Yeah,
then and then
Pentecost.
and
Yeah,
then at
okay.
later points in those accounts, Jesus is explicitly telling them to go out and convert the Gentiles, right? So it comes out from it comes directly from Jesus himself. The thing though is the symmetry breaker here is in Mark. There's still some contention here because in Mark, all Jesus tells them is to preach, and Jesus doesn't specify Jew or Gentile. So the fact that later, even if the Pauline writers are historically more reliable or more historically prior, and we find Judaizing Christians that Paul is explicitly teaching against, Mark is still silent on this, or Mark doesn't specify, rather, right?
Okay.
That's the problem with your assumptions, right? Is you're building assumptions upon other assumptions, right? And the only symmetry breaker that we have is the internal critique of Scripture itself. So this presupposes that what we have to do minimally, is to take what the Gospels say in whole to be what was held true by the early Christians. So regardless of whether or not even the canon of Scripture itself was canonized at some later date in the fifth and sixth century, we still have to hold it historically reliable that whatever is canonized even later, as it is attested in Scripture, is what the earliest Christians believed. So your question is answered. It's addressed. So the only question that is going to remain for someone who is agnostic on the belief about Jesus Christ as the Son of God, the only other question that's going to remain is whether or not they believe that it is historically reliable to assume these things. And it's not going to be because some church told you or didn't tell you.
Okay, let me address that in a fair way. With greatest respect, I understand the internal logic of what you just said with regard to the already compiled gospel. Okay, but to simply say it's an internal critique, these are the gospels we have. These are what they claim. Pauline Christianity is older.
Well,
There's a logic.
because you're appealing, you're already because that's what you're appealing to, right? You're appealing to what happens in the case of the Pauline letters, right? Where these things are quote unquote claimed to have these contentions claim to have exist, right? So you're begging the questioner whether or not, right, there was that or whether or not Judaizing Christians was fundamentally the only type of Christian.
No,
And
no,
if right, but
I'm
if
not
we go to
claiming.
Mark, Mark is actually silent on this issue.
I'm not.
Only
No,
in
no. I
Matthew
think.
and
No,
Luke is it
hold on, hold on,
specified
hold on,
that
hold on,
Jesus,
hold on,
when he
hold on,
commissioned them,
hold on,
told
hold
them
on,
to go
hold
out
on,
to,
hold
the
on, hold
words
on,
are,
hold
go
on,
out to the 12 lost
hold
nations
on,
first. He
hold on,
says, don't go to
hold on.
Samaria, don't go
Hold
to
on.
like the Gentile lands,
Can I
go to the
speak?
lost tribes of Israel first.
Can I
But
speak?
clearly, in Jesus's own teachings,
Can
even
I
in
speak?
Mark, he is, what is he doing? He's not
Can I
only
speak?
healing people on the
Hold on. I've let
Sabbath,
you talk.
right?
I've,
He's also eating and drinking with Jew and Gentile alike himself.
yeah,
And
lad.
Jesus also, what is he
Okay,
doing?
I understand. These are things in the
You know the
Gospels.
story of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Good
okay.
Samaritan?
Hold on.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know this.
So
Yeah,
right. So the teachings himself unilaterally across all the Gospels, and that's precisely the teachings that Paul, right, is referring to, right? Well, you've heard it said, right, that Jesus was doing these things. So that's how Paul is justifying his own teaching is by the attestation of Scripture. So it's through Paul, who historically is sourced, for anthropologically and archaeologically speaking, is sourced to be earlier than even Mark. Yet even in the Pauline letters, he's referring to teachings or narratives that are found within those same gospels that we can only source or not much later, but later than Paul sequentially, right? So that's what I'm saying. When it comes to the question of whether or not Judaizing Christians were the only type of Christians that the early Christians
okay.
believed,
Can I
Mark is
speak?
silent on this issue,
I never
and and
claimed
and
that
Paul's right,
Judaizing
right.
Christians were the only Christians. What I was saying is that Orthodoxy, as we understand it, was formulated in the fourth century, and
What
my
what I'm
evidence.
doing is granting your premise, right? My belief would be that it's actually more historically reliable to hold that the only Christians, right, that could be considered even in the first century, even as the earliest Christians, are Christians who are trying to fulfill, right, the prophecy of Abraham in such a way as Jesus intended it to be
Yeah, and
taught,
I
which was to
understand that.
preach, right,
No,
the
hold on.
good news to
Yeah,
everyone
hold
and
on.
not just
And
Jews. And that's
if
what
you're
Paul
aware,
is
hold
holding
on,
the Jews.
hold
That's
on.
what Paul is holding the Christians to account, whether they are Jew or Gentile, in the Pauline letters,
Of
because
course, but
Paul's
of course,
audience is everybody. He doesn't just preach to the Jews. He's also preaching
yeah,
to the Gentiles in
yeah.
Romans, right?
And Gnostics in the third century held to
So
Paul, and
for
that
all
was
intents and
Paul.
purposes, where we don't have any evidence to the contrary, it is more historically reliable to hold that in fact the earliest Christian belief was the belief in Jesus Christ as the Son of God by all people, whether Jew or Gentile.
Yes, and but
Yes,
what I'm
and
trying to
so
say is,
that's the thing.
hold on,
Bart
let me
Ehrman's
speak, let me
critique falls
speak,
completely on
lad.
itself, right? He
No,
can't
hold
appeal to any external
hold
critique,
on,
and the internal
hold on,
critique can be proven to
hold
be more
on.
historically
Can I
reliable.
speak, lad? I've let you speak. The Gnostics in the third century claimed to be Pauline. They claimed that they were completely following the letters of Paul. That is a fact.
Right,
Now, of
but
course,
but
you
here's
would agree with
here's the
that.
thing. Did the church and the church communities recognize them as Orthodox? And the answer is univocally no.
But that was because,
Yeah,
well,
but you
not
see, but here's the thing.
later on, yes.
You're gish galloping, and and I'm trying to. The heart of the matter is this, right? You're choosing to remain agnostic, and just be aware that the stakes involved in you doing that, right? Which is that you're willing to suspend your disbelief about what the early Christians, both historically reliably and also through attestation and the teaching of the church, right, hold that was in fact the case. You're willing to remain agnostic on this and suspend your disbelief for yet to be unsubstantiated claims to the contrary. To
No, I'm
me,
claiming that
to
I,
me, it seems more rationally incongruous to hold your position than it is to hold the position of the church.
what, that everything that historically happened was correct. Like, again, this was my second point that I never actually got to.
That's
If you
that's
were,
just a straw man. That's just a straw man, sir. I was willing to
okay,
engage with you, right, on those categories of history that we actually have, and also
yes,
provide the internal critique for it,
but
right?
hold
And
on.
for you to just
What I,
straw man to say
hold
straw man
on.
my position to mean that, oh, it just means that I accept everything on face value. That's
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm
disingenuous.
saying
But
is,
that's literally
I
what you
believe it's
said. It's
completely
recorded.
historical.
I can
Hold
say
on,
this.
wait, calm down. Hold your horses. I'm not trying to fight
Well,
a
I
row with
want
you.
no. I mean, here's the thing. Okay, I understand why
Hold
you
on,
might be
can I
passionate as well.
speak?
No, no. I'm just
Can I
clarifying.
speak?
Okay, I'm not. I'm
No,
not trying to
come
listen.
on.
I'm
I've
not
let you talk for
trying
like
to
10 minutes.
filibuster you.
Come
Hey, I'm
on,
not
and
trying to filibuster you,
I'm not.
but I do have to get this off my
Please,
chest at this point, right?
go
Because
on.
I have been pretty, ingenuous with you, right? Like I've been trying to be as agreeable with you as possible, as much as I can. Here's the thing. The thing about logic and philosophy, right, is and analytics in general. It's cold, right? And it can be cynical, right? But at the end of the day, Willie, regardless of however you might feel, right, the facts just don't care about your feelings. No one is obligated to understand your position for you.
Hold on. And let me just get this is the second point I was trying to make, which was again unrelated to the first point, right? But I will go back to the first point, and I'm trying to talk with you the whole way through. You have talked for like 10 minutes, so let me get this out, and then I will come back to you. Okay? You are aware in the 12th century, Nestorianism was very well liked.
Shut
You're
up,
going to
bro.
think,
So now we're
what the
going
fuck
to
is he
the
going to
12th
do?
century.
Hold on.
What happened to
The
the
story,
4th century? What happened to the 4th century in your claims about
hold on.
orthodoxy?
Listen. No, I'm going.
I mean, this is
Shut
Nestorianism.
kind
up,
of a
bro.
leap though. This is a leap
Hold
of almost
on.
1100 years.
Just let me get to my point, and then we'll
Well,
get
it just
something right.
seems like you're trying to run away
Let
from the
me just.
historical
I'm not trying.
reliability of the
I'm going to come.
scriptures.
This was the.
Shut up, bro.
Remember how I said 10 minutes ago I wanted to make a second point, and you didn't let me because you talked for like 10 minutes. This is the second point I was trying to make. I will go back to the first point, but this is another point I'm just trying to make.
Right. Well, you're
In
just
this,
gish galloping around then. It's not a point. You're
no,
just going
stop.
from
Just
one
listen.
point of
Just
contention to
let
the
me.
next.
I'm trying so hard to engage here. Like, please, please.
Well, I mean,
Okay. Just
I
let.
wouldn't necessarily call it engagement. I think you're just here trying to vent your frustrations and your feelings with your own understanding of scripture.
No, if
But go
because if I
ahead.
was doing that, I would be being a lot meaner. I'm not being mean. Like
It
I
doesn't
like
matter
I'm
if
not
you're
saying
mean or
I'm
not.
not
I
saying
can
I'm
take
not
mean,
saying
dude.
any.
I can take
I'm
no,
not
dude,
saying
sir, you're not hurting my sensibilities. Trust me, I can take
no.
it.
I'm not saying anything bad
Discord is
about the
basically the
truth.
wild, wild
I mean,
west.
I'm
I'm
not. If I
okay
was no, hold
if
on,
you use
hold on,
expletives and stuff
please,
too. It's
lad,
fine.
lad, lad. I'm gonna talk. If I
If
was
you believe
no,
I'm
I am.
stupid to holding the
No, I
beliefs
never said you
as
were
the church
stupid.
teaches it, that's your
No,
prerogative, and I
no,
can't
no,
really
no,
convince you of
no,
that.
no, no, no.
But
I
go
never
ahead.
said that, and I was completely engaging theologically. I'm not attacking the church in any way. I haven't attacked the church or its belief
Right,
or
but
its
you're just
believers
suspending your
or any.
disbelief, right? And you're just pointing
Just
to
listen to
other.
what I have to say, and then you can please, like, come on, man,
Okay.
come on, for the love of God. In the 12th century, there were Mongolian tribes that practiced Nestorianism. Nestorianism had managed to get from fucking Iraq all the way to Mongolia,
Yeah,
and
non
these tribes.
sequitur. And Saint John
This is my
Damascene
point.
Saint John Damascene claims, right, that Muhammad actually learned from an Aryan preacher and wrote the Quran
Yeah, yeah,
from the teachings
I've
of
heard
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I've heard that
Okay.
thing.
Yes,
Yeah,
these are all
that's right.
non sequiturs to the historical
No, but this was my
reliability
second
of
point
what
I
the
was
early
trying to
Christians
make.
actually believed.
Okay, and I was on God's providence because I did talk about
Yeah,
that at
but
an
this
earlier point.
again, you're not recognizing the logical incongruity of your claims, right? This is a non sequitur. It's a logical
No,
fallacy.
it's the second point I was trying to make. I'm trying to make a second point. I'm trying to talk to you about this. Okay, so just hear me out. Calm
I
down.
think no, well, I mean, I just think you're just a naive skeptic.
I'm not a naive skeptic.
I don't think you have claim like you're I don't think you're actually trying to make a claim to know anything about the history of scripture. That's the thing.
Okay, why would
Because it's
God?
just because
Why would
all
God?
you have
Why?
left is
Hold on. Can I
non
just make my
sequitur.
second point?
Well, don't you realize that you're
It's
just
not.
engaging
It's not.
you're just shifting the goalposts at this point and you're just
I'm not
continually
because I'm
begging the
not
question.
talking about the second point.
That's
This
all
is the
you have
second point I
left.
wanted to make.
Okay.
This is the second point I want to
Yeah,
make.
but
Can I
second
make it?
point, hold on, before you make the second point, which I'll allow you to do, second point in relation to what?
Just a second point as in why I'm not Catholic.
Okay, so it's
Why
another
I'm not Catholic
generalized claim.
anymore.
So it is another generalized claim. All right. So okay.
Okay. Second point as to why I'm not Catholic. I don't understand why God would allow things to happen this way. In the 12th century, there was Nestorian Mongolian tribes. This is documented. Genghis Khan was close to some of these tribes. Ultimately, Nestorianism died out in these regions. Why would God not only not allow actual Catholicism to reach those regions until the 12th century, or like would allow a heresy to reach that area and then allow it to die out? I don't understand why that would ever occur if the whole point of the evangelizing is to bring the good news to everyone. What is the logic in that?
Uh, can you rephrase? I'm like what is the point that you're trying to make again? So
Okay,
12th
so the
century,
only
there
Christianity
was
that these people received
Nestorian
was the
Christians that
Nestorian
died out
heresy.
and they didn't make it to the Oriental West, like they didn't make it to China. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like the only Nestorianism made it to Mongolia, and then it died out within like a century or two. So you have these people who have practiced a heretical
Uh-huh.
form of Christianity for about two
By
centuries.
which century? By what century?
12th century, 12th
Yeah, but when
century.
did it
Like
die out? When are you claiming that it died out?
I think like the 13th century, there was evidence of Mongolians who practiced Nestorianism in like when they conquered Iran. So it must have been around in like the 1200s, maybe 1300s. But there doesn't seem to be any evidence of it past that point. So they never
And
actually.
you're saying that it died out, right?
Yeah, yeah, it
Okay.
did. Like not in Iraq. There's still Nestorians in
Yeah,
Iraq,
but
but in Mongolia.
what if I can do you better, right? I mean, this so again, like I called you out on Gish galloping. I called you out on moving the goalpost. I called you out on running away from the historical reliability of the biblical belief of the Christians, early Christians, to allow for you to, I guess, provide another non sequitur, right? That had nothing to do with your original first point, and a
No, it
second
didn't.
point
That's
that
why I
seems
said it was a second.
completely unrelated to your first point, whether or not it
Yeah,
has to do with influence, whether you believe in Catholicism or not. Because in general, I believe both of your points, right, are not intellectually honest enough to actually address the crux of the issue of whether or not you believe that what Christians believe is that Jesus is the Son of God, right? And if that is the only, if that is the central, right, core tenet of Christian belief, right, then historically what happens, whether whether or not you consider the 4th century, the 7th century, the 13th century, the 15th century, or whenever, to be the moment in history of where you have the institutionalized or universalization of this belief. I believe that all of those claims to, that whichever date or century you claim to be the start of the institutional church, to be wholly arbitrary, because we do have historical reliability for that belief as being
what I'm
established earlier.
saying is that I
So
don't
the
think
second
my
point, right, and the
yeah,
second point,
don't think there
right.
is.
No, no. The reason why I have to be long-winded about this is because, right, like you've literally been gish galloping since the beginning, right? You've been just expressing your feelings about how you're agnostic, all these points, and we've allowed you to like basically vomit all these points out, right? And I'm not trying to like disclaim any of that as valid. It's valid that you hold these criticisms, right? But if you're going to hold these criticisms, then yeah, we need to get into the intellectual, like the nuts and bolts about this, whether through history or logic or the facts themselves, right? Okay, so you're saying that your second point has to do with 12th century Nestorianism that was found in all the way in the reaches of Mongolia, right? So I
Yeah,
posted you just the wiki on Christianity in China. So this would be a counterfactual to your example in the 12th century, where the earliest sources or archaeological evidence that we can find for Christian writings and manuscripts making it all the way to China, and like actual Chinese, during the Tang Dynasty, and like actual like, Chinese, Christians, so to speak, right? Early Christians.
yeah, and
And
they were
these people,
suppressed.
hold on. These people were beyond, right, like the reaches of the jurisdictional church, right, in the sense that they didn't have priests, they didn't have bishops. All they had were readings that made it to them through the Silk Road, right? Because it was trade. There's always been, trade going all the way back to the antediluvian period of human history, right? This Silk Road that existed between the East and the West, right? And it's through these same like historical trade routes that manuscripts of Christianity made it there, whether they were from Nestorians, Arians, it freaking doesn't matter. These manuscripts made it there. By the time of the Christian missionaries and the Jesuit missionaries reaching China in the in the period of mercantilism, like 1500s, 16th centuries, 15, 16th centuries, when the Jesuits actually went to China, what they found was that there were actually communities of Christian believers there, and they were believers in the sense that they believed that Jesus Christ was in fact the Son of God. So your claim that somehow God closed this door on them, that this is some counterfactual for how God didn't even care about his word reaching all the way there because there was no jurisdictionality to it, is also an unfounded, unsubstantiated,
Well, it is.
and proven to be wrong historically. Again,
China,
it's
Mongolia,
not
like
historically
again,
reliable for you to claim that this was the case, right?
it is. If you look, type in Christianity in Mongolia, and you'll see what I'm saying.
It
Like
doesn't
you've just made me Christianity in China.
here's the thing, okay? Well, I mean, I've already dispelled that. Like, did you look at the wiki article
Okay,
on Christianity on
yeah,
China
and
in
I've read in
China?
this before. And also, Christianity was
So,
brutally
I mean,
suppressed in China for centuries.
hold on. But if your claim, well, I mean, that's the thing. Then you have to go back to the internal critique itself, right? To say what even Jesus or the Christians believe, or Jesus taught, or the Christians taught about what belief in Christ as the Son of God was going to entail, and yeah, it was going to. Jesus Christ Himself says is going to necessarily entail persecutions, right? If they did this to me, what do you think they're going to do to you? That's literally Jesus' words. So there's no incongruity there, right? Secondly, uh, if we want to go to Matthew 10, and we're going back to literally the commissioning of the 12, what
Also,
Jesus
just to
says
be
is,
clear,
hold
I
on, hold
just
on.
had a skim. Hold on, can I just side note before you continue? Your article
But
actually says that there was no evidence of Christianity by the time the Jesuits came back in the 15th century. There was Islam. Islam had taken over. And also the Christianity practiced under the Yuan dynasty in the 14th century. I'm just
mhm.
reading the article you sent me. Was Eastern Christianity? It was Nestorianism, like the point I was making about the Mongolians. There was Nestorians there, but there wasn't any Catholics. And this Wikipedia article agrees with me. Now again, I'm skimming it, so I'm taking your word. I'm not. I'm going on good faith here. I'm assuming that what your thing about the Jesuits, but it doesn't say that. It says the opposite.
Maybe I misspoke. Um, I mean, the Jesuits were the first Christian missionaries there. From my
Well,
understanding of like the Jesuit reports, is one of the first things that what's his name? The first Jesuit uh, missionary in his own writings, he does write back to the Vatican and say like, "Yo, there's Christians here." So I don't really know where does it say? Hold on.
hold on, I'll read it for you.
Okay.
I just can't. I'm on my phone, so I can't multitask. Look, again, I'm not. Like, this is the thing. I'm trying to be good faith here. I'm not trying
No,
to.
no, no. It's fine. But here's the thing, right? Okay, so let's say like there's still evidence that go to like the 1400s, right? That there were like practicing Christians or Christian believers in China that made it even through manuscripts. Okay, great. There was 100-year lapse, right, before like the Jesuit
But
missionaries showed up
Nestorians,
again. So
like they
that
were
still doesn't
Nestorians,
that doesn't dispel anything. You get
but
what
they
I
were
mean?
Nestorians.
So I mean, right, but your point was your second point, right? You're saying that your second point was that how could God allow this to happen, right? How could Christianity die out even before it makes it out to the east? So it looks like what Jesus was saying was wrong, right? The belief itself, proof in pudding, didn't reach the far corners of the earth. Is that your claim? Is that the point that keeps you to remain agnostic? Is what I'm saying. That seems like a pretty weak claim, wouldn't you say?
I
If you're
just
gonna
sent you
if,
the
if you're
article.
gonna
I'm on
base
go
it on a
on my,
lapse
no.
of
Again,
100
what my
years,
point,
like
my
that seems
point,
pretty lame.
why I'm agnostic is I can't make the leap. If a genuine agnostic belief is I can't make the leap of faith into this specific belief. Like I was
Yeah, but
Catholic,
what
I
I
was
would
rare
say is
Catholic
what I would say is well then
and
yeah, that's
confirmed.
right, but
Like,
what I would say was that sounds like more of a you problem, right, than it is a problem for the
oh,
church,
it
right?
doesn't.
All the church has to
Oh, it-
demonstrate, all the church that you're right, that's the thing. You shouldn't base, right, whether you believe the facts to be historically reliable based on what the church is saying that it is historically reliable, because that's what all the orthodoxy and the councils are about, right? It's actually incumbent on you. If you have a problem accepting that, then you need to go study and research the history yourself. And even
Okay,
so,
the
even
article.
at, if
Do you
even
see the
after
thing
your
I've just cited on Mongolian, Christian
if
Mongolian?
after your inexhaustive like treatment, right, of the history and the facts at hand, you still are agnostic on the issue, then that's fair game. That's fair play. But
Okay,
but so far of the points that you've shared like with me here, like none of these claims actually are able to stand on their own. They're all circumstantial, right? They rely on other
well, I
facts
admit they're totally
and
historically circumstantial and
right. And
contingent, but that's my point.
yeah,
I
but
believe that orthodoxy, as you understand it, is just a historical fact that occurred over centuries of, you know,
I mean,
you know, declaring
orthodoxy is
different
something that's
different
still
beliefs
being
forever.
developed even now, right? But that's the thing though. The core propositions of the truth,
I
right? Like
just
the
don't see
core
God's
things,
providence in it. I see it as a
there
historical
are
fact.
core
Does that make sense?
things, right? Whether it's taught in scripture or historically known and attested by the earliest Christians themselves, are universally and historically reliable. They're consistent, like the core beliefs, right? That Jesus
I
was
mean,
the Son of God, that
mm,
he was the son of Joseph and Mary, right? He claimed to be the Son of God. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He died. He rose again on the third day, right? He resurrected. He ascended into heaven to sit at the right hand of God. So literally, we're doubling down, we're tripling down over and over again that he's literally the Son of God. That's a profession of faith.
It's
And this profession of faith,
yeah.
as far as we know, is historically reliable to assume that even the earliest Christians believed that this was the case, or that this was the content of their belief,
I'd say that
right?
what Abysmal is
And
offering is entirely
go ahead.
reasonable. And I'm just saying, like what you're proposing is entirely reasonable, but your agnosticism, Willie, has to be predicated on not predicated. Your agnosticism has to be somewhat challenged on the basis of, are you saying that Christianity is wrong on the basis of institutions, or because it has to
Sorry, yeah, I
start
know
from
you just
somewhere.
joined this conversation, so it's been going on for a bit. But
Yeah, yeah.
I said earlier I can't make a leap of faith. Like for me, it does seem
Mhm.
mostly historically contingent on that this is just that facts that kind of ultimately prevailed over the course of
Well,
several. I was
well,
talking earlier about like
can I
like
ask
Jewish
you?
Christian sects. Yeah, go on.
Can I ask you, like,
Also, I was raised
I mean,
Catholic. I should put that in, or like I was born
sure,
into it, right?
sure,
Yeah.
sure.
So I
But
don't. I'm not
my
trying to like
yeah.
own Catholics. Just that
No, no, no.
everyone
Of
knows.
course, of course. But like, in many ways, for the one of the biggest things that I found agnostics or atheists or just critics in general of Christianity do is that they conflate Christ with the development of the sociopolitical identity of Christianity. And in many
Are
ways,
you
if the
Catholic as well?
sociopolitical, no, I'm not.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but but I do
My
but I
claim
do
to
accept
Catholicism.
Christ. But I do accept Christ, and I think that Christ is a very important standard for us to conform to in our day-to-day activities. And in many ways, our agnosticism should not be towards Jesus. And to conflate the sociopolitical development of the church with Jesus, with the purity and majesty of Jesus, is the mistake, right? Because you can't
You
throw
and
out
the
the
guy
baby with.
Astro are probably gonna have to juke that out a little bit too, because he's very much
Sure.
making the claim like that. You know,
Well, I mean,
well, he
the
speaks
reason why I
himself. But
think
like,
the reason,
Yo, for all intents and purposes, Willie Buhari has it right. My only point of criticism of you is that your agnosticism seems to, move to the extreme case, right? Where you're willing to suspend your disbelief that that was, in fact, the belief that the early Christians hold, especially when you're citing Bart Ehrman.
yeah.
You don't realize that even Bart Ehrman has to accept that the writings of Paul did come before Mark, and he has nothing
well, I
left
think
but the
I could
argument from science
argue from
to
the
claim whether or
counter
not
example.
Judaizing Christians were the only Christians to begin with, right?
Okay,
Like
I could argue from the
the
counter
internal
example. Like,
critique doesn't even meet up with that, right? So that's what I'm saying. My only criticism is that your agnosticism, right, is literally uh, founded on
I
a
never said these
suspension
are the
of
only reasons I was
disbelief on
agnostic,
whether
by
or
the
not
way.
you could
But just
hold, right, that Jesus Christ is in fact the Son of God, right? That
these are Catholic specific
what the quote
criticisms.
unquote
May
Orthodox
I?
Church is saying
Just to be
was the
clear.
belief is the belief, because you're saying that the institutionalization of the church didn't happen until like the establishment of Orthodox belief, which is at this particular arbitrary time. For you, it's the fourth century.
May I
Yeah,
interject for a second?
yeah, but
Yeah, like, I mean, your pursuit to be a better human being, right? In many ways, you aim to, I would imagine, you aim to exemplify the qualities that make you a more productive person in your society. And those
yeah, sure,
qualities and
everyone does.
values and attributes, yeah, those qualities, those values and attributes stem from somewhere wherein you naturally look for archetypes that uh, act as a standard that you gravitate towards. My only question is, if not Christ, then who? Right? Because in many ways, your agnosticism can't be predicated on the throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and the baby is Jesus, right? So
I think
if
that's
the
a fair point.
bathwater itself, that yeah, and in many ways,
I think
your
that's a
love
fair
of
argument.
Jesus can't, yeah, and your love of Jesus can't be diminished on the result of a criticism of the activities of the church. And sure, you can maintain your criticism, but that does not at all should affect your love of Jesus Christ, considering
I should
your
say I
aim
haven't
as a
actually
human
brought up
being is
any
to be
activities of
better.
the church here, and I wasn't doing so like
No,
on
no, no.
purpose. I was
I'm not
obviously
saying that you are. No, no, no. Of course, I'm not saying that you are. I'm just putting that on the table, right? That if at all you are looking at Christianity to not actually conflate the majesty of Jesus with the socio-political developments of the church. That's
Yeah,
all. I'm just putting that on the table.
yeah, Muher is just providing what he believes is an acceptable criterion for intellectual honesty around the Christian claims. So what this would
Sure.
mean is that for an agnostic, this would uh, arguably put parameters around how like generalized your agnosticism can become before it's no longer addressing the
Mm.
Christian claims.
Yeah. Like, what are you agnostic about? Is the question.
I'm agnostic towards all the Abrahamic religions. I'll just be complete, and also all religions. But
What?
obviously, I know more about it. I know all.
Mhm.
I know a lot more about Abrahamic religion, so I discuss that a lot more. I'm not going to profess a huge amount of knowledge on Eastern religions,
Sure.
to be honest.
Sure.
Um,
So,
but
so
I'm
you're
agnostic about
go
anything.
ahead.
I just like. I'll be honest. Again, this we're talking a bit about history, but we could argue from a counterfactual, which I know is a lazy thing to do. But like, of course, if a Buddhist came into the room right now, they would claim, yeah, the Buddha claimed this. He had disciples. We have this set belief system that's been passed down by like set beliefs that have been passed down over thousands
Well,
of
can I
years.
secularize
People
the
in Buddhism.
subject for you? Can I
Do you know what I
secularize it?
mean?
Because I want, yeah, no,
Yeah, go ahead.
100%. And I want to secularize the subject and find secular corollaries, because I don't find your agnosticism towards religion transferable towards other topics, and I can explain why.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's say, for example, let's say, for example, you aim to be the best possible chef. Okay, it would be reasonable for you to look at videos made by Gordon Ramsay, right?
Perhaps.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. A celebrity chef who knows how to make nice
Right,
food. Sure. Yeah.
right. And in many ways, you gravitating towards a particular height that you think that Gordon Ramsay has achieved becomes your sole purpose because you've already decided that you want to be a good chef. The point here is the corollary, and there's like so many other examples, but the corollary here, not to bore you, is that the chef, like Gordon Ramsay, would be Jesus, right? He's the Messiah.
Yeah.
He's the presiding monarch in that particular domain. Now, your pursuit as a human being, right, um, can't have any agnosticism towards the thing that is the manifestation of that goal you're attempting to achieve, right? Because you wouldn't do that with cooking, but yet you do that with religion. So you actually, it has to be consistent,
Oh,
and in
no, no,
many
no,
ways, unfortunately,
no.
it doesn't sound like it
No, I
is.
should clarify. I would love to be a theist. I would love to be a theist. No, I would
Yeah,
love to be a theist. Just to be clear, like I'm not trying to be a little
Right,
smart
but
here. Like I would
everybody would
much
like
prefer
to,
to
but
be
it
a
doesn't
theist.
mean but it doesn't mean everybody's intellectually honest about it. That's it.
sure, but I want to hear what Willie has to say. That's true, but I want to hear what
If
Willie
we
has
had,
to say.
if we were in a Buddhist room, they would tell us that that criterion of maybe not perfection, but someone to emulate would be the Buddha. Or if we were in a Muslim room,
Sure,
God forbid, they'd be saying Muhammad is the best man to ever live. He does,
sure.
even though he had 4 wives or whatever, or 11 wives, whatever.
Mahmoudi.
They would claim he was the best man to ever live. So I understand you're saying Jesus is the guy you want to emulate. Agnosticism is being dishonest because on the one criterion of life that's actually very important, which is religion, you're not trying to emulate a good guy. But I guess I would take a step back and then just simply say, why Jesus as that guy to emulate in the first place? Is that
Well, okay.
a
Can I
fair question?
answer? Yeah, for sure. Why Jesus? Well, in many ways, when you as a human being who's an active organism in this socio-political atmosphere, you're called to put a finger on the pulse of its development, of your community's development, and to diagnose, right? And through diagnosis, you're able to calibrate your actions to do what's necessary to augment the quality of your life for both yourself and the people around you. This whole process is called the development of protagonism. Okay, you're supposed to do that, right? So in many
Right.
ways, when you put your fingers on the pulse of the Roman society at that point, you can identify
Mhm.
particular problems with it, socio and political problems with it. There was
Yeah.
rampant corruption. There was sectarianism. The identity of the the fabric of the Jewish identity was being pulled in various corners. So then it necessitates someone to arise. I don't care if it's Jesus or if it's Mark or if it's Alex or
Yeah, but
whoever.
to the
Like
point.
the variable still stands, right? But whatever name you choose to ascribe to that variable, right? It would necessitate someone to actually do the pulse check and then start acting in a way that's contrary to the norm, that's creating that stagnancy. Okay, so
Yeah,
Okay,
I
you're
like that word.
losing me here a bit
so
because I don't think
Stagnancy.
unless a Catholic's actually in the room talk, I don't know if a Catholic would hold that to be an orthodox belief, or like
no,
Well,
no,
hey,
they
look,
would.
I'm not.
I
This has
think they
nothing
should
to
go
do
and
with
try to like be
Catholics.
brothers.
This has nothing to do
No,
with
I
Catholics. There's
understand.
nothing.
I understand that.
This has to do.
Brothers as well.
Yeah, this has to
Or
do.
yeah,
Bro,
This has
chill,
because
bro.
you asked why Jesus, right? Right, and it's important for us to understand why someone like Jesus decided to act contrary to the social norms of the time in order to extract out of the stagnancy, the swamp of stagnancy, something that can last 1,000 years, and if not two, right?
That's
And
funny.
in many ways, Jesus did that. Dude, I'm gonna have to ask you not to interject. Okay. Um, so
Why?
so that's what Jesus did, right? So Jesus, in many ways, did the very thing that you would do in a classroom setting. Like if no one's learning and you see learning as important, you'd manifest those qualities as best as you possibly can, so you can, through your actions, teach others what it means to excel in a particular department. But except that department that Jesus was focusing on was the socio-spiritual condition of the time. So you're saying why Jesus? Well, why not Jesus?